All right. And Jose, it's so good to see you. Thanks for doing this Thoughtful Readers Gathering with us. And I'm also really glad to partner with Magic City Poetry Festival um, on this specific event and another event for those who are in or near Birmingham. We're hosting a poetry salon on the 19th. If you would like to join us for that, there are about 10 spots left. And I can add the link to the chat soon. Although I think those of you who are on here might already be registered. Okay, so why don't we do introductions? Why don't you say your name, your city, location, and is there something else? Oh, if you have any thoughts about that poem that I had on the screen while we were waiting. And I will let Laura go first because she's representing Magic City Poetry Festival for us today, and just let her share a few words about that. Oh, Laura, you're muted. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much for putting up with me being muted. Now I'm going to be nice and loud. I'm Laura Secord. I'm with the Magic City Poetry Festival. I'm the Director of Community Engagement. And we are co-sponsoring this with Spiritual Direction for Writers and Charlotte Donlin. And we're just really excited and thrilled to have you here tonight, Jose. Okay, we really appreciate your poetry and are excited to hear more. I just want to say something about the festival. We have lots of events this month. MagicCityPoetryFestival.org has all our events, plus it has a link to all the open mics in the Magic City area this month. I also want to say that Charlotte didn't mention, but she is also helping Magic City Poetry Festival sponsor an event on April the 20th called Return to Wonderment. It is an event of jazz and poetry put together by an incredible couple from Nashville. And so they will be performing jazz with poetry and I believe video as well. So it's a very special thing. So you don't have to, you can come without registering, but we'd love to know how many people are coming. So anyway, Magic City Poetry Festival is sponsored by many grants that I can't list all the names of, but PEN America and Alabama Humanities Foundation are at least two of them. And we have wonderful community sponsors, and Charlotte Donlin and Spiritual Direction for Writers has been partners with us more than once. We also are featuring two events. One is Poetry at the Museum, which will be on the 13th of this month, and then on the 26th, we are doing a performance of For Colored Girls who've considered suicide when the rainbow is enough at Miles College. So we have lots and lots of cool things to come to. And I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Salam, I'd love for you to go next. Salam is our newly announced Birmingham Poet Laureate, and it's good to see you here, Salam. Even though I just gave away part of your introduction, but please take over and share other stuff you'd like to share.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you. Good to see you, Charlotte. Good to see everyone as well. I'm Salem Green, a poet laureate here in the city of Birmingham, but also excited to be on tonight. I heard of your work, Jose, from Ricardo Ruiz, who's a friend of mine who wrote in his book. So I'm excited. So thank you for having me. And Magic City Poetry Festival, yes, go to as much as you can. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Salam. Alyssa, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Munoz. I live in Huntsville, Alabama. I just loved this book. I have so many feelings about it. I'm a first generation American. And so this poem particularly, where it said, I have it like all written up. My father's calloused hands, his broken English, his constant obsession with the English language, which he will never master, because English was my dad's second language, but my first language, I know very little Spanish, which I'm having, as I get older, big feelings about. I'm rambling now. Anyway, I loved this book. Thank you so much, Jose. And now I'll pass it.
Thanks, Thanks, Alyssa. I'm so glad you're able to be here after traveling. Susan, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Susan Cunningham, and I am in Fresno, California, in the California San Joaquin Valley. And I'm just really interested. I've been writing some poetry about my Armenian heritage and my grandparents who came here as immigrants. So I'm super excited to learn your poetry.
Great. Thanks, Susan, for being here. Jose, is there anything you'd like to say before we get started?
No, thank you everybody for being here. It's an honor to be here. I especially like reading poetry on Sundays. I think, the day slows down a bit from the busy week. So just thank you. And I look forward to reading and discussing.
Awesome. Thanks. So one thing I like to do on during my gatherings is to kind of let go of what we were doing before we got here and pause and transition into what we're doing now. And we will start that with some deep breaths. I like to do a 6-count inhale and a 6-count exhale on my deep breathing, because I read in the book Breath by James Nestor that every religion from the beginning of time has a prayer that has a 6-count inhale and a 6-count exhale. So I like it, so I went with it. But you're welcome to breathe however you like. I will take a few deep breaths, and then Jose, I'll ask you to read The Magician for us to start us off. All right, let's breathe. And Jose, you can start whenever you like.
Okay. Thank you very much. The Magician was actually going to be the original title for this collection. And then I started wondering if it only spoke about the surrealism, and it sort of avoided the first section of the book, which was more about my first gen Mexican American experience. So I wanted a title that brought that more into play. And I tweeted it out that I was thinking about changing the book name to Bad Mexican, Bad American. And then everybody was like, yeah, definitely. That sounds great. And they really loved it. So I knew I made the change. But this one is the first poem in the second section, which opens up the prose poetry section of the book. A magician went to the market. He wore a scarf and sunglasses so the townspeople might not notice him. He got eggs and milk. He got toilet paper. As he was examining the apples, a young lady spotted him. You're the magician, aren't you? You're Carlos the magician. Yes, I'm the magician, he said, but I'd really just like to buy some fruit. The lady went on and on to Carlos about how she loved his shows, his wand, his illusions, how he could make a giant pickup truck disappear. Thank you kindly, said Carlos. He politely shook the lady's hand and went to pay for his items. He checked out, this time without any detection, and drove home. As he drove home, he noticed a pair of jokers in the street. They began to fist fight. It started to rain. The jokers rolled around the pavement like dogs in the rain. The magician then pulled his car over, exited the vehicle, and calmly walked up to the jokers. Abracadabra, the magician shouted as he waved his wand. In the blink of an eye, the jokers transformed into a pile of tulips. Red tulips, yellow tulips, black tulips. The magician got in his car and drove home. It was the beginning of spring.
Thank you. I love that poem. I really kind of want to just dive in and start talking about the poems, but I feel like I have to do what I say I was going to do, which was to start with the reading and writing life conversation. So let's start there, even though I just want to talk about poems. My first question for you, which is a question I love to ask all kinds of people, especially writers, is how do reading and writing help you belong to yourself, others, and the world?
Well, for me, it's really everything. I did my degree in English at UC Berkeley. I transferred from community college to Berkeley. Um, and I love to read and read poetry and short fiction, but I didn't know what I wanted to do in terms of a career. So I was working at the library, um, and I was working at the library in LA, and just reading everything I could get my hands on. And that's when I started to discover more contemporary poetry, um, writers of color. Um, discovered Octavio Paz. I discovered writers of the Chicano Renaissance, um, and I started to see that there were writers who looked like me, um, and contemporary. So I just read as much of it as I could, um, just enjoying it. It didn't feel like a chore to me. It was interesting, and when you enjoy something that you're reading, you can really read a lot of books because it becomes pleasurable as opposed to like a job, or required for school. And I was always the type in school, if it was assigned to me, it must suck. So that's why I did in school. I was more like creative as opposed to scholarly. So everything that was assigned to me, I assumed was part of the establishment. So I had to sort of discover it on my own at the library. Um, and that's when just reading so many books, not going out a lot on the weekend, I started to write my own. The language just started to spill out of me. Initially, it was a lot of poetry inspired by the beat poetry movement and the Chicano Renaissance. Um, and I started to realize that there were magazines, literary magazines. No one ever told me in my life about literary magazines or anything like that. I just discovered it through the books that there were magazines listed in the acknowledgement section, and I started to Google it and submitted to them, and I got my first publication in Bombay Gin. And immediately when I got back then, they sent a letter in the mail in 2011, and when I got that letter in the mail, I felt like this is what I want to do with my life, just publish. And I didn't even really think about teaching at that point. I was terrified at the thought of teaching, honestly, but um, just the publication, and it made me feel like I had some worth. I felt like I was kind of a failure after college and not knowing, I didn't think I could teach English in high school. So the publication route to me gave me voice and empowered me. And little by little, I was, building up a resume of some of the best literary magazines in the world, which I didn't really even know, but could help my career as well in terms of teaching. And people started offering me teaching jobs and teaching with literary organizations. And so reading to me, people always ask me to give advice to writers. And I always say that prolific, they tell me, you're so prolific. You have, 5 books coming out next couple of years. How did you do it? And I always say prolific writers are always prolific readers as well. Um, it's like if I was going to be in the NFL, I would probably be hitting the weight room a lot and lifting a lot of weights. It's the same thing if you want to be a professional writer. You gotta lift books up and read poetry. So that's what reading is. It's pretty much been everything to me. And I have 2 sisters that are English majors. My mother was a preschool teacher and encouraged us to read, going to the public libraries. And the public library is probably my favorite. I would get buried there if it was allowed. It's probably my favorite place on earth. So yeah, reading to me and it started off as just a passion and an interest and an obsession, and now it's developed. I just got hired at UC Riverside to start teaching um, in the MFA programs, so it turned into a profession.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that. And I'm gonna break my own rules and ask you to read. I never had a Mexican American teacher growing up because it's related to what you just shared. This is a poem on page 16 for those who have a copy of the book with you.
Okay, thank you. This one is previously published in a magazine that was called Crazy Horse back then. I think it has a new name now. I think Pink Swamp, is it? The Swamp Pink. I think it's Swamp Pink. But I never had a Mexican American teacher growing up, or any teacher that wasn't white. Just stating some facts. In fact, my teachers were wonderful, white as they were. I lived in a multicultural neighborhood, but it took longer for that to be reflected in our educators. Today, I hope it's much more diverse. I guess that's part of the reason why I don't feel comfortable as a teacher. Never seen a Mexican male English teacher. Also, however, I think I would find any excuse not to stand in front of a group of strangers. My therapist tells me maybe I can be that teacher one day for someone else. That brown teacher talking about poetry, comparing a father's hands to battlefields and strawberry fields. Maybe I could be that teacher one day, today perhaps, who teaches a brown boy how to sing in verse and in stories.
Thank you, Jose. I don't know if you saw the photo of the copy of my book that has all the poems dog-eared that I like in this book, where it's like 97% of them. And even I should probably dog-ear all of them, but I feel like I had to like prefer some more than others, but it was most of them. And that's one of them. So thank you. It's so nice to hear the poet read their own work. One question I have for this reading and writing life portion of the program is, what are some of your comfort reads that you return to again and again? And I would like to also ask for you to talk a little bit about prose poems in this answer, even if they aren't your comfort reads, and the surrealist poets that you return to also.
Yeah, it's tough nowadays. A lot of my reading is related to the workshops that I run, finding new material for the workshop and reading, writing from the writers in the workshop. But so I don't return a lot nowadays to work. But some of the, my favorites are The Ghost Soldiers by James Tate, Bright Dead Things by Ada Limon, the smallest muscle in the human body by Alberto Rios, Slow Lightning, Eduardo C. Corral, Skin Tax, Tim Z. Hernandez, Homero Aridquis, any of his work in Spanish and English. There's a writer named Shivani Mehta who I just discovered last year, who is like jumping up to the top of my favorite authors list. She has a collection called Useful Information for the Soon to Be Beheaded, and it is prose poetry. Tends to be surreal prose poetry. I love Don't Let Me Be Lonely, Claudia Rankin, prose poetry collection. I love, yeah, I mean, that's probably enough, but so I like to mix it up between linear verse and prose poetry. All of my books or manuscripts are split between the first section, linear verse about my real life, and the second half or the second 2/3, um, or the latter 2/3 being prose poetry. Um, except my first collection, which was a chapbook, which was entirely prose poetry. And when I was approached about that manuscript, the editor asked me if I had a manuscript to submit. And at the time, I was conflicted because I had a full length manuscript, but I felt it was divided between first first half linear verse and second half prose poetry. So I didn't feel that it was so cohesive. So I just sent him the chapbook of the prose poetry, and later on, I just thought about splitting my books into linear verse and prose poetry, but I said no. I think it represents who I am more if I put it together, even if it's a little bit, um, even if it contrasts in the terms of aesthetics. And so it worked out, and now most of my collections that I have, actually all of them, are split that way between linear verse and sometimes people, I find some people like the prose poetry more, some people like the linear verse um more. So
Can you talk a little bit about your decision, like how it came to be that your autobiographical poems are linear and the surrealist, not necessarily autobiographical, but might also be in some way, are prose?
I think when I enter the space of the prose poem, um with the no line break, I feel more free to just explore and discover and be experimental and surreal and quirky, and let my imagination um and my craft elements blend and work together. And often when I'm writing linear verse, or when I'm going to write about something from my real life, for some reason, like the neatness of the couplets, or the line break, and it just works better for me that way. I do have some prose poems that are autobiographical as well, um, but they did take me longer to write than my surreal ones. So I just think when I'm entering the paragraph with its the freedom of no line break, um, the freedom of adding the prosaic element to it, a little bit more stripped down language, um, that I feel freer and more experimental. Um, but yeah, it's kind of something that's kind of, I don't really know how to explain it that well in terms of why it's like that. I think a lot of the I started writing in couplets a lot, my autobiographical work, and I was unsure about it. Um, Couplets, tercets, and quatrains, and then I saw Alberto Rios would use a lot of couplets, and he did it beautifully. And he's a very established poet, so it was sort of like a stamp of approval when I saw that he did it, and I tried to sort of emulate some of that seamless quality that he has with his work. Um, so um, so just I think the prose poetry, on the other hand, I was not familiar with prose poetry until 2014, when I took two semesters off of graduate school, and I was reading James Tate, and I noticed his book was writing prose poetry without line breaks, and I didn't know you could do that. Um, and it just drew me in. The language, it lulled you in. It had surrealism combined with everyday settings, and it was it was kind of like rock and roll in the form of poetry. A lot of the poetry that I was reading bored me, honestly. It was very intelligent and sophisticated and polished, but it took like 1,000 years to write, and in some, lonely office there, that just like, it wasn't fun, it wasn't edgy, and I was in my late 20s at the time, so Tate spoke to me when I was reading his work. Um, and on top of that, he had won, the Pulitzer and the National Book Award. So it's kind of like he was getting permission to be playful and subversive and still celebrated. So I just thought, you know, I can try to do that as well. And so initially I was more trying to, you could say, trying to write like him a little bit to start off. Um, and then I started to incorporate my own settings in my own neighborhood and my own Mexican American imagery and into it, where his were more Midwestern settings. Um, and when I did that, I think it sort of gained even more momentum. And you know, you learn from the master, and then you take your own path. You know, Kobe Bryant learned from Michael Jordan, and he took his own path. You know, everybody learns from somebody. Not that I'm Kobe Bryant, but, so you know what I mean, though, right? Um, you got to learn from the masters, and then make it your own. You know.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I just want to take this moment to give a shout out to Jose's poetry classes that he conducts online. I think I've taken 3, and I don't always get to go to all of them because it is more of a playful, enjoyable thing for me because I don't write poems primarily. And the poems I do write, I just give myself permission to play and write mediocre poems. But you have helped me write poems. And I remember, I mean, I took a couple of prose poetry classes, and then I took one on something, and I was having trouble with one, and you're like, put it in a couplet, like use couplets. And I was like, okay, cool. And then it worked. And so I appreciate your teaching style and how like low key you are about all of it. Um, I luckily have only taken poetry classes from people who are low key about it, but I imagine in quote poetry world, things can get a little uptight. Um, can you just talk a little bit about your approach to like poetry and the poetry world, and how you found your way and like the freedom you have to be who you are and write your work?
Yeah, I mean, well, poetry to me, it's almost like religion, you know, and it's sacred, yet at the same time, you know, I try not to be like pretentious about it. And I think everybody has their own voice, their own story to tell, their own aesthetics to interpret and explore. And so I respect it so much that I would never like, you know, be harsh on a writer for like, you know, just to like you're saying, I think I'm pretty easygoing and flexible, and I understand that everybody has their own voice. Um, and the way that I learn is through trial and error, and you know, I don't have like every secret in the world on how to publish. I just work at it, and it's interesting to me the process and what I learned in that process. I like to show others because for me, it gave me voice, it empowered me, um, and it gave me meaning and belonging and community. So I think that showing others what I learned, um, whether it's form, you know, I tell folks sometimes we're saying the right things in our poems, and it's beautiful in the language and evocative and interesting, but it's like we're in a job interview and we're wearing the wrong outfit, you know. Sometimes the poems can be accentuated by form and polished, and so a lot of the editing I do is um is more line break and form, and um giving it a little more structure, and that could make a world of difference, I think.
Awesome, thanks. I have one more question from this writing, reading, life portion, and then I'll let others ask questions about writing and reading if they want to before we talk more about your poems. Um, you mentioned a lot of pop culture in your work, and different genres and forms of high art, low art, and all of the in-between art. Can you talk a little bit about how art helps you belong and how art nourishes you, especially during really busy seasons. I know you've had some illness and you've had this book come out and you have 2 more books coming out in the next year or two. How do you find nourishment in different forms of art?
Well, I think for me, you know, I grew up with family who still is very religious, Christian, and you know, to me, I started getting out in the real world, and you hear about wars and you know world wars, and sort of you kind of stop believing in religion sometimes. But to me, like art and poetry kind of became a replacement for that, gave me meaning, purpose, and a voice. And sometimes I'll just sit there and look at my books that I published and just like be grateful and prouder than anything I've ever done in my life. You know, even though you don't get filthy rich off of it, but you know, it means more than that to me. And I always wanted to be a writer, you know, since I was in high school, and my English teacher talked about Camus and Salinger and these writers that to me they had a lot of dignity and a lot of creativity, and I just wanted to be them so bad. And I was getting like C's and D's at the time, and I was playing football. I got suspended a couple times for fighting. Um, and I remember the teacher came into the office when I was with the assistant principal, and she kind of convinced him not to kick me out. And they read my essays. She read my essays and said, "You should be getting A's in this class. You know, you could be a writer." And at the time, I didn't really think about anything, just playing football. I didn't think about the future or anything like that. So I started to just get straight A's and reading on my own and going to Barnes and Noble and things like that. And I think I wanted to impress her a little bit, so I would just try hard on the essays. And at that point in my life, like you know, I had first generation Mexican American family, and they're very supportive. But I don't think I was ever told like, "Are you going to go to college? Should you go to college?" or anything regarding that. But I did have an older sister who was the first in our family to go to college, but she was kind of busy living her college life, you know, so she had moved out, so she didn't always um she showed me more by example, you know, about going to college. But this teacher, you know, I could tell she really cared, and she had no reason to, you know. I was like, why does she even care about me, you know? But so I started getting straight A's, and I went to community college, transferred to UC Berkeley. And at community college, I got straight A's too until my last semester. I took 8 classes because it was the only way I could transfer in time. And I got 4 B's and 4 A's. But after that, um, I don't even remember what the question was originally, honestly.
It's okay. It's okay. That all works.
Yeah.
Is that the teacher that you showed a photo of on Instagram a couple weeks
Yeah.
ago?
Yeah. And she
Okay.
would get like teacher of the year all the time. Like
Mhm.
everybody loved her. I remember the first day of class, she said, "I don't care if you guys chew gum, just, you know, throw it in the trash can afterwards." And everybody was kind of like, that way, now that I realize that was kind of her way of like showing us that she was on our side as opposed to like just authority for the sake of authority. And
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's when I first wanted to be a writer. I sent her my books in the mail, and she's still teaching.
I love that. Um, also, before I ask if anyone has questions, there's a creative writing nonprofit here in Birmingham called Desert Island Supply Company. And it's based off of the 826 organization. If you're familiar with that at all, they teach poetry in the local city schools here. And Liz Huey, who's a poet and who runs their programming, messaged me today and she's like, "I can't come, but we teach Jose's poems at disco to the kids." So she was sad that she was going to miss it. And I was like, well, I'm going to tell him because I know he'll appreciate hearing that. So That's me telling you about the disco poems before
That's wonderful. Yeah.
I forget. All right, does anyone here have a question for Jose about reading and writing? Or we can go on and jump in, or about any specific poems or the book. I know, Laura, you were asking a question about the structure earlier, when I interrupted you, when y'all were first on. Oh, you're still muted, Laura.
I was just commenting on the thread that runs through the prose poems of the different characters and the t-shirts that they're wearing, and how that is like, that just, it's playful in a way, but it's metaphorical as well. And I just wanted to hear more about how you made that choice to make that an ongoing theme in that part of the book.
Yeah, I think prose poetry, it can be written in third person. So that spoke to me when I first discovered you could write poetry or prose poetry in third person. Initially, I was writing a lot from first person and me, I, confessional. And the fact that you can come in disguised through the third person, masked, and use persona, and you didn't have to be as direct. Instead of saying, I had a bad day, someone told me to go to hell, you could write, the man in the Pink Floyd shirt dug a hole to hell. Someone in his backyard, someone had told him to go to hell earlier that day. And it just becomes this like absurd scenario. That's how I wrote the hole, from the Fire Eater. I don't remember if someone actually told me to go to hell, but it's just being playful and subversive. And you could come in, like Tate said one time in an interview with the Paris Review, that prose poetry, you could come in disguised. And a lot of people say Tate doesn't write about his autobiographical life after the first few books, but with prose poetry, you can write about how you're feeling through characters and personas, and Kafka-esque elements, absurd elements, and deadpan style, that a lot of these techniques and art practices can invoke an emotion in the reader, and there's a lot of discovery going on as you write. So it wasn't just confessional for me, personal, political. I felt like I was writing the same poems over and over with the personal, political, which is fine. I think I'm going to write personal, political poems my whole life, because politics is always relevant, especially as a brown man in America, who grew up first gen low income. So, but I like to mix it up. And to me, the prose poem was a venue, or an outlet that I could explore characters, persona, um, and get out like tension, and through absurd dialogues, and just get experimental with it. And I came to the page to discover, as opposed to going to the page to um, grind out my agenda, or my when I write linear verse, I kind of already know what I want to write about, and I go to the page to say it. And when I go with prose poetry, I don't need to necessarily know what I want to write about. I can maybe start off with like a line or an image, or a prompt, and then build through discovery, improvisation, associative leaps. Um, so so I think it works out for me to have the personal political outlet of linear verse. And if I was just doing that, I feel like I would be consumed by just thinking about politics all day. Like it would drive me insane. And then if I was just being playful and surreal, I think I would be avoiding some of the real world issues, which are always relevant as a person of color in America. So I think combining both at times, or having both on the page and in the books. And sometimes there's prose poems that have the political involved as well, and surreal, so not limiting myself um, and really trying to channel the energy as I write these works, and um, balancing experimentation and craft. And I think it really, I'm in awe, because I lived many years where I didn't know what was going to happen with my life. I was in some bad situations, and I don't know how I ended up like this, with books and teaching at a university. And it could have gone a lot worse. It could have gone a lot worse. That's all I'll say.
Thank you, Jose. Did you see Alyssa's? Oh, never mind. Okay. So, well, I want to know though, like in the book where someone's wearing, like, are the characters that are wearing a specific shirt, are they kind of related to each other in some way, or is it not that?
It's not as relevant, but
Okay.
um it's a way to just also reflect, some of these bands and musicians, like MF Doom is considered a subversive underground hip hop legend with a lot of wordplay and almost like, an artistic genius. And then bands like Chicano Batman are local underground LA bands. So a lot of the references are for musicians who are working sort of underground, subversive, um, except Pink Floyd, but they started off like that. So it's a bit of my own personal way to reflect my own personal taste in counterculture music, um, and so it reflects my identity, my personality, my interests, while also working sort of against the mainstream in an artistic way. Um, as far as are the characters related, someone asked me that before. I said, well, I think the Chicano Batman and the man in the Chicano Batman shirt and the man in a Carlos Santana shirt are from Southeast LA, where I moved when I was 14 years old. And the man in the Pink Floyd shirt and the man in like other shirts are probably more of my Northern Orange County upbringing when I was in childhood. So other than that, I think it's just a way to get into character, to mix it up a little bit so it's not the same band reference all the time. Because initially I started off with the man in the Pink Floyd shirt, and you kind of you want to try new things and create new series of poems. But the only thing I did notice is that sometimes, like the man in the Chicano Batman shirt, it tends to be in Southeast LA settings.
Mm.
So I'm discovering myself, as I write these and map it out.
That's interesting, the connections between certain bands and the poems you write with them, and then the connections to place and specific places. So now I have to go read the whole book again and look at place and t-shirts. All right, does
Oh,
anyone, oh, go ahead.
one last thing I'll say, in my latest book, I have 3 new shirts. The man in a Baudelaire for President shirt, the man in a Kafka for President shirt, and the man in a Salvador Dali for President shirt. So that's from my latest manuscript.
That's awesome.
And also because, it's election season and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Does anyone else have a question for Jose?
I have a question. Jose, did you always feel like you really believed in your work, or was that that ever a struggle for you? Were you ever unsure or uncertain about putting your poems out into the world and how you might do that, or if you would do it?
When I was in undergrad is when I was more unsure, because I was more just living the life of a regular undergrad, partying and cramming for finals, and I was not a really a great student. Like, I don't know how I got into Cal, but well, at community college I did better because I was away from my friends, So I just focused right there. But when I was in Cal, I brought a couple of my friends with me from Southern California and we moved up there. So we were, having a good time, you could say. And so I didn't put the work in with the reading. So I wanted to be a writer, but it was not that polished. And at that time, it was short stories that I wanted to write. And it wasn't until, I did kind of have the confidence in the sense that I knew my teacher believed in me when I was younger, but I felt like in high school, I did better. And then in undergrad, when I transferred, I drifted away and was just like first time living on my own. I was like 19, so um, living with my best friends, and we were not that responsible. So that really went went south really quick. I had to move back home to LA, and it wasn't until I started going to the library on my own and reading on my own without being forced by the school and that's when I put the work in with reading that um like I thought you could just be a writer just by writing, and I'm sure you could if maybe there's writers out there that don't read a lot, but once I started putting the reading in and taking an interest in reading is when my writing became more polished. And ever since then, and knowing that I can just read for hours, and I'm not married, I don't have kids, so a lot of my contemporaries are busy doing that, so um, that's why I've written so much in these past couple years. I don't go out a lot, so I go to the library on the weekends, so I, it's Sunday and I went to the library this morning. There's only one library open in the area in La Habra, so it became an obsession to me and something that I enjoyed. Like I would probably do it if I didn't get paid, So um, for me, um, now that I have the books, I'm trying to more balance my life out with everything else. But I think that's when I started to gain the confidence was with the reading and but I had to gain confidence in teaching too because up until 4 years ago, I never taught a class in my life. And I started getting published in magazines and some of a magazine, Litro magazine, asked me if I wanted to teach a prose poetry class. And I was terrified. And then I just told myself, well, if you published in the Yale Review, I think you could teach a prose poetry class. A lot of professors can't even get in there, And then I got an NEA and I didn't have a chapbook or a book. And I said, if you can get an NEA, you can teach a workshop, And it was more like a social thing that I was terrified of, like being in front of people, and I was always the quiet one, So, um, luckily, after the first few workshops, and I started to realize, okay, you can't wing it. You have to go in there and have lesson plans, Because I think one time I tried to wing it, and that was like the one like really bad class that I had. So then I started to appreciate teachers more, even more, was like with the work they do. And people always tell me like, "Oh, you're gonna teach at a university," and I always tell them the real heroes to me are the teachers who work like in inner cities and teachers who work with elementary school students and high school students. That is labor, that is difficult, an art, a talent, and stressful and challenging. I could barely do like one workshop a day. Imagine like just nonstop classes for 8 hours. Like I don't know how people do that, but so yeah, just I learned that initially when I was younger, I thought I was just talented, in the sense of like my sisters were English majors. I had a sister that went to Harvard, and I just thought maybe we were more linguistically capable, like to read, because we were first generation, and somehow we were like all English majors, which I didn't really know anybody else like that. So I didn't put the work in because I thought I was just like, oh, I was good at writing and reading. But then you could take it to another level when you just read a lot and take interest in it. So so no, I wasn't always confident, and even now I'm aware that my writing is not everyone's cup of tea, but nobody's writing really is everybody's cup of tea, you know.
Jose, can you talk a little bit about just kind of the way that like writers who don't quit are sometimes the ones that have the most success because they just keep trying, they keep showing up. And like I see it in like people I went to school with for graduate school with my MFA. Like I'm not the most talented person, but I've published more than a lot of them because they just kind of quit somewhere along the way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, the rejection um reality is difficult. You know, not everybody can deal with it. Um, if I'm getting rejected very often, and I have all these books and everything, I imagine that it's just like rejection city sometimes, you know? So a lot of the writers that I work with, some of it is just not submitting enough, you know? And some of it is just being discouraged by rejection. And some of it is not realizing that rejection does not necessarily mean bad. Um, I've had plenty of all of my work basically rejected at once, and then eventually would get into all these great magazines. You know, my poem "A Date with Frida Kahlo" was rejected 15 times. Yeah, they were like top tier magazines, but eventually it got into the London magazine. You know, and not everybody realizes that you get 5 rejections. Some people might give up on it. You know, so part of it is talent and work ethic, but also part of it is the ability to keep going and believing in your work in the face of rejection. And I think after you submit so often, you start noticing that even though something was rejected at, Pittsburgh Review, it can get accepted at Colorado Review, you know. So it's a bit of a crapshoot. If you only submit, you know, work that's not ready, you'll probably get all rejections. But if you have the work ready, you have 5 poems that are ready, polished, and you start submitting it enough times, it'll probably land, you know. So it's not a crapshoot in the sense that you can just submit anything. But if the key is to get the work ready, and now to understand that you're facing the mountain of rejection, and it doesn't usually mean that the work is bad at that point. It's just limited space with some of these journals. 1 to 3 to 5% acceptance rates, and so I always tell writers to diversify their submission strategy and also submit to experimental new journals and mid-range journals. And I've been a part of plenty journals um, who it was their first issue, so there's also um, a nice feeling to be involved in the early progression of a magazine, the growth and the community. And a lot of the smaller journals, they kind of treat you better because um, the big journals are so busy, and publishing Diane Seuss and all these greats. So maybe they'll nominate you the mid tier or the experimental for push carts more likely, and so there's benefits to it as well.
Thank you, Jose. Does anyone else have a question before I ask you to read another poem to close us out? Okay. I'd love for you to read the poem that I shared at the beginning. An ode. Sorry, it's got a long title. An ode to the overlooked minimalist painting in the gallery. I love this poem so much. It's what I get kind of obsessed with certain poems and have to read them multiple times a day, and this is one of them right now. So Thank you
When
for,
you said ode, I was like, is there an ode in the book?
no, sorry. It was just in the title. Yeah.
Yeah, no, no, because my portrait of the artist as a brown man has like 20 odes in it, but I said I don't think this one has an ode in it. But you're right, you found the one ode in there. Um,
Yeah.
so this one is called "Ode to the Overlooked Minimalist Painting in the Gallery." The best art is that which is overlooked or underappreciated. A minimalist painting that is thought to be simple or bland. My father's calloused hands, his broken English, his constant obsession with the English language, which he will never master. Someone tagged me in a post today on Twitter, thanking me for being one of their 3 followers. Someone ran after a crowded bus because they were late for reasons beyond their control. Most black, brown, poor kids in the hoods, barrios, and trailer parks are starting from behind their privileged neighbors in the suburbs. Survival of the fittest, Protestant work ethic is not the same as centuries of privilege. I had a reading 2 months ago in Venice Beach with 3 attendees. One was my mother. The other 2 were guitarists from a local strung out band. It was the most intimate conversation at a reading I've ever had. So we drank all the wine I brought and read some poems. I feel like autumn is the most beautiful season, and I know it's cliche for a poet to say so, but decay, abandonment, they make us stronger, wiser, more human if they don't kill us first.
Awesome. Thanks, Jose.
Pleasure.
Before we go, do you want to tell us a little bit about some things coming up, like when your next books are coming out and maybe any classes you're teaching or events you're going to be a part of?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. My next poetry book and prose poetry book is called The Parachutist. It's coming out in January 2025 with Sundress Publications, a full-length collection. And then I believe it's going to be in the spring of the same year, Portrait of the Artist as a Brown Man, winner of the Benjamin Saltman Award with Red Hen Press. It's either going to be the spring or the summer or the fall that it gets released. I don't know yet exactly. But if it's spring, then hopefully AWPLA in my backyard, I'll have 2 books being released. And then I have a workshop with Imprint Bookstore coming up first week of May. And yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, and y'all follow him on Instagram, Twitter, Threads. You do a good job of announcing your workshops ahead of time to give people time to sign up. And again, I highly recommend those just for playing and learning. And I also, while we're here, even though we're 1 minute over, I really appreciate your generosity to like the literary community and to your students, because you do like, you tell people like where to try to submit, like who's taking poems right now. And like, you do a lot of good work to help your students get published. And not that I'm trying to get published in poems, but I see you doing it and I really appreciate it. So, oh, you're muted, Jose.
Like I was saying, for me, poetry saved me, publishing saved me. It rescued me from depression and feeling like a failure and like I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So I put out those opportunities, so that other people can hopefully, explore publication and be aware of the opportunities, because when you're starting out, especially, not everybody is familiar with the resources and submission opportunities. So I've been in all those magazines, and it would be selfish of me to just like not share those opportunities with people who can also join me and feeling with a purpose, which and with the voice, which writing provided for me. So
I love that. That's a great example of like having more of an abundance mindset than a scarcity mindset, which is something I'm writing about in my next book. So I might use you as the example. So thank you for that. Well, thanks so much to everyone for being here and celebrating Jose's latest book and celebrating April, National Poetry Month. And thanks to Magic City Poetry Festival for partnering with me on this event. And anyone who's watching this on the recording, I am going to be sending resources and things. It says in a few weeks, but it'll be more like the summer. I'm just behind on all of it, but I do have a lot of resources for all of the Thoughtful Readers gatherings I've had and different things to help you explore Jose's poetry and some of the things we've talked about in this gathering. So thanks so much to everyone. I hope you all have a good night and happy poems.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks for having me.